Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the University of Mumbai, I welcome all the eminent esteemed dignitaries who have contributed enough to their respective field. On behalf of the University of Mumbai, I request our Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Ravindra Kulkarni sir, to introduce the guests and introduce the School of International Relations and Strategic Studies. Thank you.
Good evening and thank you, Professor Rajesh Karat. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
It's a matter of pleasure for me to welcome all the distinguished and eminent personalities for the joint program, which is organized together by School of International Relations and Strategic Studies and Pune International Center for panel discussion on book Rising to the China Challenge. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Suhas Pednikar, Guest of Honor, Dr. Ajay Mashalkar sir, Fellow of Royal Society, and then President Pune International Center, and the most important for me, being an ICT professor, Dr. Mashalkar is our Chancellor of Institute of Chemical Technology as well. Chairperson of today's program, Sir Jaydev Ranade, former member, National Security Advisory Board, as well as former Additional Secretary, Cabinet Secretariat on Government of India, and currently President Center for China Analysis and Strategy, and the esteemed panelists, former Ambassador to China, Bhutan, and Pakistan, Sri Gautamji, Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, with the chairman as a SF Ward and trustee Pune International Center, Dr. Ajit Ranade, President and Chief Economist at Aditya Birla Group, as well as member Pune International Center, Professor Ajay Shah, co-founder KDR Forum and member Pune International Center. So all the distinguished members, let me welcome all of you for the panel discussion on the book Rising to the China Challenge. Let me introduce School of International Relations and Strategic Studies of University of Mumbai at this occasion. The School of International Relations and Strategic Studies was inaugurated on 10th of June at the hands of Chief of Army Staff, General Manoj Narone sir. This School of International Relations and Strategic Studies deals with multiple disciplines within the Faculty of Humanities, like studying the political developments and socio-economic profile, as well as art, literature, cultural traits of other nations. This year they introduced master's program in international relations and strategic studies, where the students will be studying in depth the different social, cultural, political, and economic issues of other nations from Indian perspective. Moreover, the School of International Relations and Strategic Studies intends to introduce research activities like doctoral research work and other diploma and certificate courses with specific area and region-specific studies like Center for South Asian Studies, Center for Crisis Management, Center for Peace and Conflict Studies, Center for Migration and Diaspora Studies, as well as certificate course in diplomacy as well as foreign policy. I thank the Pune International Center for jointly organizing this program with School of International Relations and Strategic Studies. As is rightly pointed out in the preface of the book, Rising to the China Challenge, it's a right moment which calls for a unified view as well as policy coherence, as well as robust consensus within the country in reference to the challenge given by China on different fronts, whether it's a national security concerns, whether it's a manufacturing sector, or whether it's a digital security. So whichever way, like we need, of course, to look at China, Indian-China relationship, not only from country perspective, but even in global context. And as well as we require ourselves to be prepared in an intellectual manner so as to present a right policy with reference to challenge given by China itself. In that reference, this panel discussion on book Rising to the China Challenge will be definitely a great will be a great step which will provide right context, right analysis, right strategic forefront with reference to the rising to the China challenge. So I thank Pune International Research Center for collaborating with School of International Relations and Strategic Studies for this panel discussion. I welcome all the distinguished guest of honor, chairperson, and the panelists on this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Now, may I request Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Swaz Pednekar, sir, welcome our chief guest and guest of honor, Dr. R.A. Mashalkar, sir, and introduce him. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, good evening to everyone. It's a real privilege and honor, I would say, to introduce the world-known personality, Dr. Mashalkar, sir, under whose dynamic leadership even I have had many occasions to work with him. Dr. Raghunath Mashalkar, Fellow of Royal Society of London, is National Research Professor. He was the former Director General of Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, President of Indian National Science Academy, Chairman of National Innovation Foundation, and President of Global Research Alliance. His more than 60 honors include the prestigious Lenoir Science Prize of the World Academy of Science, J.R.D. Tata Corporate Leadership Award, and Star of Asia Award. 44 universities have bestowed honorary doctorates on him. He was a member of the Science Advisory Council of Prime Minister for around 30 years. He is a recipient of Padma Shri, Padma Bhushan, and Padma Vibhushan. Dr. Mashalkar is a president, Pune International Center, and our very proud alumnus of University of Mumbai. So it is my privilege and honor once again to welcome you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Pednekar, for those most kind words. Professor Kulkarni, Professor Jayadev Ranade, my colleagues, Gautam, Ganesh, Ajay, fellows, the members of the faculty of the School of International Relations and Strategic Studies, ladies and gentlemen. Among all the decorations, my friend Professor Pednekar talked about, to me, the most important, most valuable is that I'm a proud alumnus of this great university, Mumbai University. I remember studying in the municipal school, in Marathi school in Ketwadi in Mumbai, and then Jain College, doing into science of Mumbai University, and then of course University Department of Chemical Technology, and now ICT. So I'm very happy to be here wearing this particular hat of my being an alumnus, but at the same time as representing Pune International Center. I will be very brief because let's get into straight away the crux of the matter, which is discussion on the book Rising to the China Challenge. As far as Pune International Center is concerned, I'm very proud to say that we just completed a decade-long, very memorable journey. We have 425 individual members, 54 institutional members, having some of the most renowned institutions in the country, the IIT, the IIMs, and so on and so forth. And I'll be talking separately to the Vice Chancellor. It is good to make a public statement so that there's some pressure. Professor Pendekar, it will be lovely if Mumbai University also becomes our institutional member, and we'll talk separately about it. We have been involved, I mean, we are a think tank. We have been involved in policy research, and as we always like to say, Pune International Center is international center in Pune. We already are becoming a global think tank with several programs. The Asia Economic Dialogue, for example, is rapidly, and we'll be having the third one in February next year, is already being looked at as Davos of the East by some of them. But our major emphasis is, of course, on India, India's challenges, India's issues. For example, with Maharashtra government, we have been deeply engaged with them with regard to the policies, and particularly our paper Emerging Post COVID-19 Economic Recovery through Policy Reforms, and then subsequently our interactions, very close interactions with Maharashtra government, with our Honorable Chief Minister supporting this initiative very strongly, is something that we are very proud of. So we want to make a difference, but first to Maharashtra, to India. We have, of course, number of programs like national security. Pune Dialogue on National Security has become quite famous now. Social innovation, for example, we were the first ones to begin this national meeting on social innovations. We are deeply involved in environment and climate change issues, giving a vision of carbon neutral Pune, let's say by 2030 and so on. So I'll not get into the detail, just wanted to give you a broad perspective of this. Now, among all these, the crowning glory has been really this book, Rising to the China Challenge. And as you know, Dr. Vijay Kelkar, who is the vice president, but who really is the brain behind everything that we do, and is a master in policy research, of course. And it was his policy paper for the PIC that started the ball rolling in May 2020. He began that research along with his colleagues after the Chinese aggression at Galwan. And later on, of course, the book came into being. It's a fascinating story on how it was actually done, but you will hear more about it from others, so I will not get into that. But the book recognizes the nature of the long-term challenge that India has, particularly because of the economic asymmetry. I've just taken 5 minutes for my speech, so I will not like to exceed the time. All that I would say is the following. On a lighter vein, as you probably know, I'm a traveling salesman as far as India is concerned, anywhere we go. And you put it in different forms. So I remember one form I used to put in. Nowadays, I don't do that, but I used to do that. I used to say, IC has dominated the century. For example, if you look at the IC engine, 1872, that means the 19th century, okay, that changed the world. Then 20th century, again IC, integrated circuit, 1959 it came, that changed the world. But I used to say that 21st century, it is going to be IC as India and China that is going to change the world. Now, that was so, but what has happened is that, and I always used to say that I has to remain really very strong, very tall, etc. But that I has diminished in comparison to the sea, the China. That is the asymmetry that the book actually talks about. Of course, you will get into depth a little later, but we have been left behind in a number of ways. Like as a scientist, I can say science, technology, and innovation. About in mid-90s, late 90s, we are almost equal in everything. But if you see their R&D expenditure, it is 7 times more. Their publications are 4 times more. Their patents are 7 times more. Their researchers per capita 8 times more. Their high technology experts are 4 times more. So the book actually addresses these issues in a very realistic way and says not just catch up, but how do we basically go ahead. So with these few words, I would stop here. Once again, I welcome you all. And Suhas, thank you so much for this partnership. By the way, this book has been very, very well received. These All India Management Associations, CIS, several fora, and there is a continuous demand wherever all our authors have been speaking. We call them Gaga, Gautam Bambawale, Ajay, Shah, Ganesh Natarajan, and Ajit Ranade. They have been in tremendous demand, but I believe this is the first time that we are having it in a university with the School of International Relations and strategic. So I think this is a first, and I'm absolutely delighted about it, and particularly because it is with University of Mumbai, my university. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for those words of the wisdom. It really helps us for the inspiring the University of Mumbai and the academic fraternity all over the India. Thank you once again. Now, may I request the chairperson, Dr. Jaydev Ranade sir, to accept this forum and to chair this session.
Thank you, Professor Kharat, and good evening to everyone. I think let me start at the outset by saying that Dr. Mashelkar has set a very tight standard by sticking to schedule as far as his speech is concerned and not exceeding the time limits. That is something we will, I hope I'll be able to impress on the other speakers also. But anyway, they have a hard act to follow. Dr. Mashelkar, I'm sure, will otherwise crack the whip on them back in Pune. But let me just take advantage of the fact that I have been allowed to make a few opening remarks, which is at the outset, let me say that this book has come at the right time. It is a wake-up call, I think, for our economists, for our business sector, for the private sector, and for the government. It's not just a question, as people say, of our being left behind. It's a question of how should we tackle the present situation and how should we ensure that it doesn't happen again. There are 2-3 things that I think we do need to keep in mind, at least as far as I assess the situation. The first is that it is not just the aggression that began in May 2020. The Chinese intentions were clear even earlier. They had started gearing up to teaching us a lesson, and their objectives are very simple. It is to be the preeminent power in Asia, and they look at India as a rival. In fact, I recently came across a lengthy study by the Chinese, which actually used the term and said that while the Chinese may today laugh at India and at the manner in which it has been left behind, this article warns that that will not be the case all the time, and India is going to rise very soon, and that rise will coincide with China's decline. And so it's warning China that China has to be careful and therefore has to, quote unquote, sort out India before that. So this is, I just thought I'll mention it to underline the threats that lie before us in a number of sectors, and the book does bring it out. But before I pass it on to the speakers, let me make a couple of points about the book. The first, and I'm aware of the galaxy of people who've been involved in the writing of this book. Many of them I know personally very well, and I've interacted with them at PIC fora and otherwise. One comment that I invariably make whenever I get a book, I glance through the footnotes or whatever references have been cited. And I must say that usually I find that what they cite are some foreign sources. Now that gives us a foreign spectacle through which to look at it. So that's one thing. I think there is a lot of data already coming out now in the last couple of years. We could have utilized that on bringing this out. But I think it is the speakers who will probably enlighten us as to the nuances of this book, as to what exactly we need to look forward to. And after they have spoken, I have a few minutes when I shall probably try and make a few comments. or direct the questions at them. But let me, in conclusion, just say that this is, the book is very timely, but let us not sit back and feel that we've done our job. This is the first step. We have a real challenge ahead of us. I think we have to examine it from different angles, and I hope that the PIC does it, along with, of course, many others who are doing it. And as a representing a think tank, which is also focused on China and China-India, we have undertaken a similar project. In fact, we've already collected people, and our book has gone to the publisher. But we are looking at a broader scale, primarily in geopolitics. But what I'm trying to say is that we need a number of facets to be looked at before we arrive at a holistic view. So with those words, let me hand over to the first speaker, and also implore all the 4 speakers who are going to come on now, that the PIC has laid down 6 minutes, obviously very military precision. So please try and stick to that. May I hand over first to Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, an old friend, perceptive China watcher. Gautam, over to you. 6 minutes, as PIC says.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jaydev. Let me start. I hope all of you can hear me. Let me start by saying that, firstly, I am delighted that this first time ever collaboration between the Pune International Center and the University of Mumbai is something which we should all applaud. And we hope that there will be many more such occasions for us to collaborate in the coming months and the coming years. Secondly, I want to felicitate the University of Mumbai's School for International Relations and Strategic Studies. As a former practitioner of diplomacy, as a former Indian ambassador to various countries, including Bhutan, Pakistan, and China, I think that it is absolutely essential that more and more universities in India should have schools for international relations, for diplomacy, for strategic studies, etc. So let me congratulate University of Mumbai. Diving straight into the content of the book, each one of us is, of course, going to talk about a different aspect of the book. So I'm going to focus on the short-term aspects of the book. When the Chinese committed the aggression in Eastern Ladakh starting in end April or early May of 2020, the 6 of us started a series of very intense discussions with each other, which has led to the writing of this book. And one of the necessary conditions, which has been mentioned by other speakers already today, one of the necessary conditions which was required for the Chinese to be successful and to be able to move these large numbers of troops along with heavy weaponry to Eastern Ladakh was an asymmetry in economic and military power between our 2 countries. So, it was the fact that there is a big asymmetry between India and China, not just in economic power, but also in other aspects, such as technology, such as education, such as military power, which enabled the Chinese to undertake the military aggression that they did in Eastern Ladakh and which continues till today. Now, the book asks the question, what should India be doing? And in the long term, and my other co-speakers will touch upon this, in the long term, we say that India should focus domestically or internally on ensuring that she continues a high-paced GDP economic growth of 8 or 9% or 10% per annum over a lengthy period of time of 20 to 25 years. But all that is in the long run. What about the short term? This asymmetry will continue in the short term. So what should India be doing in the short to medium term to ensure that we do not get run over by China, as Jaydev Ranade has been saying? And our answer to that is that in the short term, India cannot but build balancing coalitions with other groups of countries, countries which are as powerful or more powerful than us, and in coalition with them, we will be able to balance out China in the short run and prevent China from making further incursions into Indian territory, and thereby we will be able to protect our territorial integrity. Now, the Quad, as all of you know, is one such example of a balancing coalition. And we can have other coalitions also. For example, we are looking at the possibility of a France, Australia, India trilateral setup. There's been talk of a Western Quad over the last few weeks, where India, builds a coalition with the United States, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates. So all these are possibilities, but all of that will be necessary for India in the short term to build balancing coalitions which will help balance out Chinese power, which will help India to meet, at least in the short term, the challenge that China poses to us, and particularly in terms of military strength, particularly in terms of territorial integrity. So that is why the name of the book is Rising to the China Challenge, through strategic patience and economic growth. In the long term, it's going to be economic growth, about which my colleagues will talk about. But in the short term, we will need to build balancing coalitions. A lot of people say that, does that mean India will have to give up its independence of action? Does India have to give up its strategic autonomy? And the answer to that is that unless we are able to build a balancing coalition, we will not have any strategic autonomy left because of the military pressure that the Chinese are putting on us. So we will have to safeguard our strategic autonomy in the long term, but in the short term, we will have to build balancing coalitions. I'm going to stop there, Jaydev, and hand it back to you. I think I've followed the excellent example set by Dr. Mashelkar by speaking less than the 6 minutes allotted to me. Thank you, Jaydev. Back to you.
Thank you, Gautam. Pune and PIC are obviously a very disciplined lot. May I request now Dr. Ganesh Natarajan from New York, I think, to join us and give his perspective for about 6 minutes. Thank you, and over to you, Doctor.
Sure, thank you very much, and a pleasure to be here in this forum. I'd just like to say that Mumbai University obviously is a fountainhead of so much knowledge, and having spent half my career in the city of Mumbai, very, very honored to be here on this forum. And let me take up where Gautam actually left off. And obviously, one of the big questions that have always come to our mind is, what is the way forward in terms of economic symmetry? The simple data point which I would like to share with you is, clearly, if you look at it maybe 200 years ago, India and China were probably contributing 30% to the global economy. But somewhere, I think thanks to China's very aggressive double-digit growth over many, many decades, we're today in a situation where the Chinese GDP, if you look at it a year ago, was touching $14 trillion, and India's was shy of 3 trillion, 2.9 trillion. And obviously with COVID, we're not getting anywhere very fast at this point of time. So what we did in this book was, we analyzed, rather than making platitudes and general statements, we said, let's get specific. So we identified 3 types of sectors, industry sectors, and we analyzed where is the difference between India and China. So one thing that we clearly had to do was, sorry for the disturbance for a minute. So one thing that we clearly had to do was to identify which areas China has enormous natural advantage. One is, of course, rare earths. As many of you know, there is a huge deposit of rare earths in the country of China. So that's one area where at best we can be, to an extent, Atmanirbhar. There is some initiative happening in that direction. The second, of course, is areas where there is a big advantage taken by China, primarily because of their own investments. I mean, to give you just one example, and if you please do read the book for all the other areas, look at the telecom sector, for instance. China today has multiple telecom agencies, and they've done a phenomenal job in terms of networking, becoming a true internet economy. India has been a little late to the party. But again, if you look at the valuations of entities like Reliance Jio, the fact that today we have three credible, not two credible, it's Reliance, Bharti, Airtel, as well as, of course, Vodafone still at the party. There is clearly an opportunity, and that's the second sector, to see how we can take this forward in the sense that we can at least get some level of parity, be completely independent, and start making forays into other parts of the world. And the third, for somebody like me who comes from the very successful IT services industry, is the opportunity to compete and be a global power. IT services clearly is one. In fact, we are now working on a second book in PIC, which talks about multiple areas by which India can build pathways to significant success. If you look at IT, today we're at $990 billion industry. The potential to grow that to maybe 400 billion in the next 3-4 years. The potential to look at IT-enabled services, look at e-commerce, look at so many areas, including platforms for agriculture, education, employment. I think we can completely transform through $1 trillion digital India. And that's something we're working on. The third is clearly the opportunity to say that beyond the IT services area, what are the other sectors? The very obvious one, which we have almost missed the bus, if you will, is the whole area of hardware. Because China is a huge hardware superpower. As many of you will recall, it started with chip manufacturing in China, in Taiwan. But today it's not Taiwan and Thailand, but it's actually China which dominates. And even many Taiwanese companies, have significant operations in Shenzhen and Guangzhou and areas like that. So here we see a tremendous opportunity for us. Whether it's in fabless semiconductor, whether it is in areas where the government has already rolled out the PLIs, the productivity linked incentives, and we are seeing a good response from Apple Computer or even the Tata Group for that matter. I think there's an opportunity there. And not just there, it's in chemicals, it's in agriculture, where we have new formats of agriculture that can come through. It clearly is in the automotive sector, where India, I think in the auto component sector has done a phenomenal job. The pharmaceutical industry, there is some reliance on APIs coming in from China, of course. But apart from that, if you look at the pharma opportunity, what we have done with vaccines, even in COVID, I think all this points to opportunities for us. The second area which we researched in terms of the industry was something that Dr. Mashelkar already alluded to, which is that we have been left behind in education and in innovation and research. Clearly institutions like Bombay University, institutions like, let's say, an IIT Madras or an IIT Bombay or Kanpur are exceptions. But if you look at the large rank and file of education in this country, it is, and I'm sorry to say this, it's a little mediocre, and we need to address that. We certainly need to bring a substantial research and technology orientation across the board. Just this earlier to this call, I was doing a call with the product forum of the IT industry. And it's unfortunate that we have kind of left the product game to countries like Israel and so many others which have got ahead of us. So that's clearly an opportunity in education. And I'll just conclude by saying that my own experiences with China have been very, very collaborative. When I was running a company in Mumbai called Aptech, we took the brand to China, partnered with Beijing University, and very quickly, within 2 years, became the market leader in computer education. China's ability to absorb ideas from outside and quickly kind of make them work for the Chinese population has been second to none. And we need to learn from that. Finally, I'd like to say that, look, we are seeing signs of slowing. In our book, we have built a hypothesis that by the time India is 100 years old, which is 25 years from now, we do have the opportunity that while we are today maybe 4 trillion, we could grow to 50, 60 trillion if we grow at 8 to 10%. And China will slow down, inevitably, to maybe 4 to 5%. And that will take them to not more than a 10 to 15 trillion gap over us. So we are very optimistic, as Dr. Mashelkar says, and I think we're all infected by that. He is a dangerous optimist. And we are, I think, pragmatic optimists who say that, look, it can be done, it will be done. Many of us have the opportunity to make it happen. So as from a purely industry point of view, and I'll stop here, the challenges are there. We have not done a good job in the last 20 years, but clearly there is an opportunity not only to succeed, but to succeed beyond all expectations and be a global leader in many sectors. Thank you, sir, and back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Natarajan. And you struck an optimistic note. You also indicated how visionary optimist is required at the helm of affairs so that he infects the others, as he seems to have done with all of you, put you on the right course. May I now request Dr. Ajit Ranade to give his views in about 6 minutes if possible. I know you all have vast subjects, but nevertheless, over to you, Ajit.
Thank you, Mr. Jaydev Ranade, my namesake. I'm happy to be here, delighted, and thanks to the Mumbai University School of International Relations and Strategic Studies for hosting us. I'll just confine my comments to a few sort of bullet points. Number one is that we have, they say to project power. If India has to project power, it has to have economic strength. In fact, it used to be said, and I know my colleague Gautam Bambawale will also agree, the best foreign policy that India can pursue is 8% growth, 8% growth, and 8% growth for a sustained period of time. So while we compare India and China on their economic trajectories, remember these are two nations or modern republics which were born almost at the same time. They might be old civilizations, as we say, but roughly, we are born at the same time. And as late as possibly well into the 1980s, it was neck to neck. In fact, I would say India's per capita income was higher. But starting sometime in the 90s and certainly the last 2 decades has seen the divergence, economic divergence. In fact, India-China bilateral trade is one of the most, until 2018, was one of the most dynamically growing in the whole world. I think at a compound average growth rate of something like 20%. But unfortunately, it was asymmetric to the extent that Chinese growth of exports into India grew at some, I don't know, cumulatively some 500%. In fact, India was destination number 19 back in 2001. India was destination number 19 for Chinese exports. By 2015, we were destination number 6 or 5. That's how important India became. So my first point is about economic strength. So there is absolutely no doubt, and this is one of the central message from the book, that as we deal with the Chinese challenge, a lot of the work is domestic. My co-authors also said it. We have to focus on ensuring high, sustained, and inclusive economic growth. High, sustained, and inclusive, which is sustained over several decades. And that we cannot forget. Second point, that the subtitle of the book is Strategic Patience and Economic Growth. Strategic patience is in the context of what is happening with India-China relationship. I'm talking about trade relationship. So we can't take a knee-jerk approach. It has to be strategic patience. In 2020, the year of the pandemic, India's #1 trading partner was a country called China. 2021, we are in October. This year also, the #1 trading partner is going to be China. This is after imposing a lot of restrictions, anti-dumping duties, putting restrictions on Chinese FDI. Back in March 2020, much before Galwan, Indian government introduced some restrictions on the flow of Chinese FDI. Even then, China continues to be the #1 trading partner. So the second point, when I say strategic patience, it means we have to recognize that there are some critical import dependencies. For example, I think sometime last year we saw these numbers. In electronics, 45% of our imports are from China. Machinery, including capital goods, 32%. Organic chemicals, 38%. Automotive parts, even now 25%. Most importantly, some pharmaceutical APIs, intermediates, 68%. So if we consider ourselves to be a pharmacy to the world, or a vaccine exporter, or a leader, global leader in bulk drug exports, including having approvals from American FDI, the critical inputs are still coming from China. So if you want to reduce that import dependency, we have to think. So that's where the word strategic patience comes from. So we have to have strategic patience. So my first point was about focusing on domestic growth. The second point is about being strategically patient and disengaged to the extent that's possible. It's not going to be complete decoupling, but develop domestic capabilities, develop, as my colleagues say, Atmanirbharta, but in a strategic and patient way. My third point is not to ignore, while we are going to talk about the relative strengths and about the economies, but my third point is not to forget the weaknesses of the Chinese economy or the Chinese political economy. I will just list some of them. Number one, aging society. Average age, median age in China is much more than India. Their labor force is declining. It has peaked, I think 2015 or 16. So that has a consequence for labor scarcity, for higher labor costs, for savings, domestic macroeconomic savings rate, and so on. Number three is that increasing skirmishes with almost all its neighbors. Increasing skirmishes with almost all its neighbors. That's not something to be comfortable about. Number four is the Chinese Communist Party's discomfort with the private sector. You know, what we saw, the actioning against Alibaba, the last minute pullout of the listing of the IPO, now with the DD, and now with Evergrande. So these are all not, these are not comforting signs for the political economy in China. And so therefore, let us not assume that the Chinese political economy is invincible. In fact, there are a lot of weaknesses. Last point is about social media as well. You know, the political system in China has to reckon with the force of social media. So I think that's my third point, that about why, as India meets this challenge of a rising China, we must not forget that there are weaknesses on the Chinese side also. And my last point is that this is my personal viewpoint, that I believe these two large economies and ancient civilizations and neighbors separated by the highest mountains in the world, we have to develop, we may have problems with the governments, we may have problems with the political system, but as we must increase people-to-people contact. The level of Chinese scholarship in India is unfortunately very, very low, if not pathetic. If you try to do Chinese language courses or study Chinese history, Chinese economy, very few universities have rich, content. So I think that is something we must invest on. That our scholarship of China must be at a much higher level, and we should also promote people-to-people contact between scientific personnel, universities, professionals, and so on, business. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Jaidev. Over back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Andre. Very good points, I must say. But may I now request Professor Ajay Shah to make his comments. He's the final speaker. We are also sort of exceeding the time limit a little bit, so 6 minutes. Over to you, Professor Shah. You're on mute. You're on mute, sir. Okay, I think.
Is this working?
Yes.
Okay. I'm very happy to be here with all of you. Just to flesh out the points made by my colleagues and co-authors. As I see it, there are two central messages in this book. The first central message is that in the world of international relations, we need to be a little less prickly, and we need to do coalitions. We need to join hands with other countries. For too many years, India has had anti-colonial views, non-aligned movement, strategic autonomy, and a basically prickly approach to international relations, where we don't want to do deals. And we always loudly claim that my internal affairs are my business, and nobody else is allowed to have an opinion on my internal affairs. But that is the pathway to being isolated. And as we point out in the book, given the 5:1 asymmetry between the Chinese GDP and the Indian GDP, it's not wise for us to face an aggressive China alone. So the way out is to form coalitions, is to deeply connect with many other like-minded countries. We identify 3 groups of countries: the great democracies of the world, the neighbors of China, and our neighbors. These are 3 places where there is a natural opportunity for us to align deeply with these three groups of countries. But we have to understand that that means doing sophisticated international relations. Then we can't just say we do strategic autonomy and my internal affairs are my business and I will do whatever I like. Then the others will say, yeah, sure, you do whatever you like, and then you're on your own. The actual world of international relations is one where we reshape our domestic policies in ways that our international counterparts like better. So the heart and soul of this project is a rethinking of the concept of international relations, away from a simple anti-colonial view, away from a simple non-aligned view, and away from a simple strategic autonomy view. It's a whole new journey. It requires new kinds of institutional and intellectual capacity in the country. And the second part of the book is the idea that 8% growth is the greatest way to protect ourselves on the 20-30 year horizon. In 20-30 years, if we have managed to produce and sustain 8% GDP growth, then we'll be in a reasonably good place. The trouble is that we had about 20 years of high GDP growth from about 1991 to about 2011, and things have not been going well after that. So on that front also, we are in a difficult position. The engine of high GDP growth has faltered. Vijay Kelkar and I have written a book on this subject. Our book is called In Service of the Republic, where we try to go to first principles and wonder what has gone wrong in the Indian journey and how high growth can be resuscitated. So these are the two big ideas of the book. And I just thought I should supplement and add to what my colleagues said so far about our thinking on China. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shah. May I now hand over to Professor Kharat for conducting the Q&A. Over to you, Professor Kharat.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. May I request Professor Manjiri Kamath, Associate Dean of Humanities, to curate the questions.
Thank you, Professor Kharat. And we have a question here from Dr. Aditya Bhan. The question is, speaking of optimism, how optimistic should we be regarding the Government of India's production-linked incentive scheme for active pharmaceutical ingredients, API, in light of the paltry share of 11% allotted to MSMEs? And later, one second. Yeah, so that is the question. Are we even serious about reducing burgeoning bulk drug imports from China?
Ajay, you want to take it or should I take it?
You should.
Well, the PLI is industrial policy. Production linked incentives is industrial policy. It's not the first world, what should I say, in economics we call it, it's not the first best solution. Industrial policy is to provide strategic direction. So there will be a time of transition. This is like picking winners, but in the hopefully most optimal way and least disruptive way. I think it's not as if India-China trade is going to go to zero. As I said, this is not the old times of Cold War. There's going to be economic coupling. Even today, when the US and China have the saber rattling going on, their bilateral trade is $650 billion across all kinds of products. So I think we have to focus on seeing which of the critical APIs we can reduce, and it's a progressive path. It's going to take time. I don't know if Ajay, you want to add to this?
No, I'm good.
No, Ajit, if I can just add to that, I mean, just one point, Professor, is that, somebody has a generic question on PLIs. I think it's very well directed in the sense they form clusters. They have good ideas going there, which is why, as I said earlier, when an Apple computer or even a Tata group is very keen. So if they play it well, make sure that the champion companies they're talking about are well identified, are given whatever incentives to make this happen. I think this can be a game changer. And like the STPI scheme was for the IT sector, which completely transformed the way we could actually export all over the world, I'm very hopeful about PLIs.
Shall I go to the next question?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so there is another question from Kalyan Chakravarti. And the question is that the plausibility of, one second, plausibility of the much publicized China's debt trap diplomacy and role of Confucianism in Chinese strategies and resurgence.
Maybe Gautam.
Yeah, I'll take that question. Thank you, Professor. Let me start with the second part of the question first about Confucianism in China. There's a fact that there is a Confucian ethic in China, even today in communist China. But at the same time, I don't think we should overplay it, because that is part of China's makeup. It may have contributed to some of the economic successes which have been experienced by China over the last 4 decades. But it is not the only thing. There are other factors which have gone to contribute towards the economic successes of China. So I would say that, the Confucian ethic, etc., I don't think we should overplay that particular aspect of Chinese culture. As far as debt diplomacy is concerned, I think a lot of countries across the world have now seen what is particularly happening in Sri Lanka, where they have taken huge loans from the Chinese. They have not been able to repay some of that debt to the Chinese. And what the result is, that they've had to give some of the land for a particular port, etc., for 99 years. They have had to lease it out to the Chinese. So, I hope that other countries can see this example, and that they learn from this example, that, there is no such thing as a free lunch, not even from China. So let's hope that other countries are able to see this for what it is. I think we don't have that issue here in India. So, but we do have it in our neighborhood. There's no doubt about that. So I'll stop there. I hope I have answered your question. I'm not 100% sure if I have, but I think those are my ideas. Those are our ideas, including some of them in that book of ours. Thank you so much, Professor. And back to you.
I would request the chairperson to let me know how much time we have for the questions, because we have already exceeded the time. May I speak about the next question? Do we have time for that?
I think we should take at least 1 or 2 more. Otherwise, the book would not have really been explored.
Okay, so there's a question by Prateek Poddar. The question is that the domestic supply of water remains a problem in India. In order to build hardware and chips in our country, we will need access to huge volumes of water. How well are we prepared to handle this issue?
It's a good question, but let me quickly answer that. See, I mean, you're absolutely right. See, if you look at the original fab method of semiconductors, it was hugely water guzzling. And although there were some earlier experiments done in Chennai and various other parts of the country, it wasn't very successful. But today, if you look at the gamut of the $2.5 trillion opportunity we're talking about, it's not just in regular semiconductor. I mean, there's fabulous methods of doing that. That's one which I mentioned. And there's also a huge component economy. Both Dr. Ranade and I feel that, look, what we should be looking at is employment generating, because don't forget, we need to put 50, 60 million people to work with all these PLIs. And that will happen. Like even if you look at one of the areas that we just sanctioned, I mean, I'm on the board of State Bank of India, is a very large facility to make just like cell phone covers. So cell phone covers is nothing. I mean, it's very, very low tech, but at the same time, it will employ a large number of people. So I think there are opportunities within the area, which is not just the water guzzling semiconductors, but you could look at a much larger gamut, which is what makes me confident.
There is a question specifically addressed, for Gautam Galaf, and I'll read the question. China has made deep inroads into India's neighborhood by way of its checkbook diplomacy and big pockets. We have seen countries like Nepal One second. Sorry. We have seen countries such as Nepal, Sri Lanka, Myanmar increasingly tilt towards China in order to balance India. So in this particular context, they ask what is the scenario?
No, thank you very much for that question. You're absolutely right. This is a fact. But at the same time, don't forget, when you ask that question, you should also put in what India is doing with all these countries. And India is doing a lot with each and every one of these countries. Of course, there is no way that we can compete in pure financial resources or pure financial terms with the Chinese. And that is not the route, that is not the way for us to go forward. We have to do with those countries what we do best. Some of it is soft power diplomacy, such as education, etc. But also we are doing hard diplomacy in terms of building projects, etc. in those countries. Some of them very successfully, and we have to continue doing that. We have to ensure that we have leverage with our neighboring countries. And let me give you just one example of that. You say that Nepal is increasingly tilting towards China. May be true, but also remember, do any Nepalese go to China and work there? Let me ask you that question. Do Nepalese work in China? I think very few of them do. Whereas in India, there are huge numbers of Nepalese citizens who live and work in India. So here is an advantage that we have, and we are going to use this as a leverage, and we are going to use this as a tool in our diplomacy. So I don't think this hand-wringing is really, I don't think that's the way to go about it. India is playing the game also. Look at that side of the ledger too. And thank you very much for that question. It's a very valid question, and I'll stop there, Professor.
Is there time for one more question, Chairperson, sir?
Well, I think we'll have to ask Mr.
Yes, sir, we can have, sir. One last question we can have.
Okay, so there is a question from Mr. Gaurav, and it's addressed to all the panelists. The question is, are you satisfied with the government's latest strategy directed at ease of business? And if not, what more steps the government of India can take up to score higher in the scale?
Well, this is there is not. This is a moving target. The ease of doing business is not a destination to be reached. You have to constantly improve. For example, if the logistics cost of doing business in India is about 17 or 16%, we have to bring it down to 8%. And when we bring it down to 8%, we have to try to go reach 6%. So I don't think, right now this Gati Shakti initiative, where 16 ministries have come together on one platform, which is kind of a master plan platform with all the digital tools, is a great, is a great initiative to break down silos. It's basically project management approach which we use in the private sector. But this is to enable fast development of the infrastructure sector. We are aiming to build infrastructure worth 100 lakh crores in the next 5 years. That's going to ease, that's definitely going to contribute to ease of doing business. But we can't be satisfied there. That's just infrastructure. Then the whole system of, using digital technology, to improve governance, improve compliance, improve, for example, one of the big reforms we have to do continuously is, in the metric of ease of doing business, one particular metric out of 10 is how quickly are disputes resolved, commercial disputes. That requires judicial reform, resorting to out-of-court settlement, quick contract, dispute resolutions, and that's a continuous process. So I think the question should not be, are we okay with this? What next? If we are done well, what is the next thing we can do? What is the next thing we can do? Continuous improvement. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So may I now request the chairperson to make his closing remarks?
Thank you. I think what this discussion has done is bring out or highlight some of the critical aspects points made in the book. on which we can start focusing. But since I have this opportunity, let me also say, and since PIC has revealed that they are going to work on another book, let me throw in a few points for their consideration also. The first thing is, and I think this book represents the first step in that, which is bringing about a mindset change among all of us. The problems that loom ahead of us are very, very serious. And I think many of us don't comprehend that. They are not only territorial, which are very major, but in the science and technology field, in the field of water, which is a question of it's an existential crisis if it comes about. So many other areas like this that we will have to contend with and which we'll have to address. The second is that China itself has huge problems, and their leadership has started identifying them, ranging from a global food shortage by 2030 to water problems, to pollution of the soil, number of other areas. And of course, the economic slowdown, which has already started and begun to bite them, raising unemployment levels among graduates alone to 14% plus. But this also brings me to another point. While we have discussed what the asymmetry and what India is doing, one critical factor that I think I should mention here is that when China looks at a sector, it crafts a policy. And I'm afraid we haven't done that. A policy means end to end. So when they looked at the IT sector, and I find that the book has referred to that, when they look at the IT sector, they looked at software, they looked at hardware, they looked at production facilities, etc. We didn't do it. We didn't do it. We left it to the private sector, who went for the maximum profit side and went into software. We've done very well there. But what about hardware? Without hardware, we remain vulnerable to whatever else others may be doing. And I think that is a big gap that we have left. There is a reference in this book to TCS getting involved. Let me tell you a little bit, share a little bit with you on that. When the Chinese leadership decided they want to address IT, they looked for the best companies in the world with whom they could partner. They selected Microsoft and they selected TCS. I won't tell you who the competitors were, but these two. And both went in thinking there are millions of dollars to be made and how they're going to get ahead. Well, they did make, I'm sure, millions of dollars. But what happened was that China, in fact, today is in a position where it is not only challenging them, it's probably threatening their markets in the form of Huawei, etc. Similarly, on artificial intelligence, again here, it is the state, the Chinese state, that has invested huge sums, including in universities, etc., to set to do the pioneering work. So what I'm trying to say is that the private sector in India or anywhere else needs two things. They need a vision. And my personal feeling is that they don't have that kind of vision. And the second, because they're looking for profits. And the second is they need cash resources, which again, they don't have because there are lots of cash which is required. There, the government has to step in, like in China, they are stepping in biosciences, etc. As far as we are concerned, I did say we need a mindset change. We have a huge problem ahead of us. And I think we need to start addressing the question or the issue of safeguarding our vital interests, and I underline vital, as soon as possible. We cannot safeguard everything, but certainly telecommunications, pharmaceuticals, as the latest crisis has shown us, are things that we have to safeguard. API has been mentioned. We had our own production of APIs, but we decided to farm it out in order to make a little bit of more profit. There, I think the government should have intervened and seen to it that we didn't sacrifice our capability. So these are the sectors that we need to look at. Finally, let me just conclude. There has been reference to forming alliances, etc. Yes, we need to do it. I'm sure our diplomacy will be deft enough to craft other alliances, not looking only at the big powers. And I say this because Biden has been there for a while now, but we haven't seen a clear articulation of China policy from him. We see confusing signals coming out, and my own friends in Washington tell me that, well, he hasn't figured it out. The Pentagon has, but the others are still, there are contending thoughts on China. So I think Dr. Ranade and Dr. Natarajan did talk about not being able to delink immediately, quite right. But I think Trump had set the trend, if I may say, and that is the trend that has to be followed for the simple reason it's in US interest. If the US does not do anything, I don't think it has a window of more than 5 to 10 years before it loses its #1 position. And lastly, let me just point out that Xi Jinping himself, the man who started focusing world attention on China, who started the aggressive policies, he is looking at getting another term at the next party Congress, which will be late next year. So from now till late next year, I think we are entering into dangerous waters and things are going to be pretty tough. I'll end there. I hope I've given all of you enough food for thought and for the next book too, Dr. Natarajan. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaydev Ranade sir. Thank you very much for giving a new perspective, new dynamics to this subject and about the book. Most of the participants are the students who have enrolled for the MA and PG diploma in international relations and strategic studies, as well as many scholars, teachers, and the students who have joined from the border states like Ladakh, Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim, and the Jammu and Kashmir. So this will really enlighten us a new experience with your seniority, your experience in the Chinese studies. And thank you once again, sir, for accepting this chairpersonship. May I now request the director of the Pune International Center, Abhay Vaidya sir, to have the formal vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Kharath. We've had a truly deeply thought-provoking discussion on PIC's book, Rising to the China Challenge, through strategic patience and economic growth. Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor sir, Professor Suhas Pednekar, for gracing and facilitating this joint webinar between Mumbai University and Pune International Center. Today's discussion began with the initiative of Professor Ajay Kharath, Dean of Humanities and Head of the School of International Relations and Strategic Studies, and we do look forward to more of such discussions in the future. I wish to thank Mr. Jaydev Ranade, President, Center for China Analysis and Strategy, and a friend of Pune International Center, for chairing this event and for adding depth to this discussion. Thank you, Dr. Mashelkar, for taking the time out for this event, and the other authors, Ambassador Bambawale, Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, Dr. Ajit Ranade, and Professor Ajay Shah, for sharing your perspectives on the solutions to India's China challenge. As Dr. Mashelkar said, Pune International Center believes in actionable research, and this book really happened because of the first steps from our 6th author, Dr. Vijay Kelkar. I wish to thank Professor Manjiri Kamath for curating the questions, and to the students of Mumbai University, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and the other universities from across the country for participating in this discussion, and to all the members of our audience for their questions. Before concluding, I would like to invite all of you to participate in Pune International Center's annual dialogue on national security on the theme National Security Preparedness in the Age of Disasters and Pandemics. This conference is open to the public and will be inaugurated by National Security Advisor, Mr. Ajit Doval, on October 28th at 10:30 a.m. Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Chief Scientist, World Health Organization, is scheduled to deliver the keynote address. Lieutenant General Vinayak Patankar is the convener of PDNS 2021. He is a trustee of Pune International Center. This link has been shared with Mumbai University and is also available on the Pune International Center's website. Once again, I wish to thank everyone, and especially to the back-end technical teams from Mumbai and Pune for making this webinar a big success. I now declare the program is concluded. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.